Subnautica is a survival game made by Unknown Worlds Entertainment. Early access was released in 2014. I was introduced to the game the following year after YouTuber Peanut Butter Gamer posted gameplay to his channel.
Hey everybody, I'm Peanut Butter Gamer and welcome to Subnautica. This is a game that I found randomly on Steam. It was actually a recommended game.
The game quickly gained traction in the game commentary community after YouTubers Markiplier and Jacksepticeye started to post Let's Plays of the game to their own channels. The publicity from YouTube helped garner much needed attention and boosted interest in the game's future. Since Subnautica was in beta for over 3 years, many fans like myself look forward to the new updates, but most importantly, the new creatures and the lore about them. With every new update came new theories, new mods, and new fans. It was a cultural runaway hit, largely thanks to YouTube and the invaluable free advertisement from the many creators who invested in the game. With over 6 million sales, Subnautica was proof that indie games can be as successful as a AAA title, and came at a time where indie developers were outperforming game companies with the aid of social media and game websites like Steam. Okay, so what made Subnautica so unique? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I can give my own experience. I have always had a love for the fear of the unknown, and a deep terror of what lies beneath Earth's own oceans. So when a game that explored the horrific oceans of an unknown world came across my YouTube feed, I was hooked. There is just something so invigorating about the things human minds cannot comprehend that drives the imagination wild. With the case of Subnautica, it takes the already established intrigue we humans have about our own oceans and explores it thoroughly in an alien environment. Upon my initial playthrough, I was immediately taken in by the unique world building and setting, while also being terrified to go anywhere except for the shallows. The whole world felt mysterious and alien, yet realistic enough that I could genuinely see a planet like this existing somewhere in our own universe. Aside from being one of my all-time favorite games, I also strongly believe that Subnautica is one of the best games in the genre, setting many new ground rules for other survival games to strive for. But what exactly makes Subnautica such a great game? Well, sit back, grab a coffee and a snack, because today we are going to talk about Subnautica. I will be going over its lore, its mechanics, and why it has made such an impact in the survival game genre. Although this video series will be used to paint a positive image of Subnautica and its contents, I will try to be as objective as possible. This means I will also address the flaws and how badly they affect the overall quality of the game. If you have not yet played Subnautica and wish not to be spoiled, then click off now. With that out of the way, let's get started. Before we delve into the deep analysis of this game, let's go over a brief synopsis of the story. In the future, star systems and planets are governed by trans-system governments, which is an independent authority in de facto control of at least one solar system and phase gate. Phase gates are basically Mass Effect relays. So think of it like this. If Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, managed to terraform Mars and claimed it as their property, then SpaceX would effectively be in control of Martian territory. In the mid-22nd century, independent companies are able to claim ownership of new discoveries. Because so many entities were now claiming everything in sight, a contract was made to establish laws for exploration, colonization, and making sure that each transgov respected each other's territory. To see to it that the rules were enforced, 37 transgovs signed a charter. One of these was the powerful weapons and starship production company, Altera. Subnautica opens with an escape pod being launched away from the starship Aurora, a deep space vessel sent by the Altera Corporation with the job of building a space gate in the Andromeda Galaxy. The Aurora attempts a slingshot maneuver on planet 4546b. This goes horribly wrong as a mysterious force brings the Aurora crashing down to the planet. The ship held 157 crew members, with only 25 life pods managing to deploy before the Aurora crashed. The passenger of Life Pod 5 is the non-essential system maintenance chief named Riley Robinson, who gets knocked out when a metal panel comes loose in the escape. Riley wakes up to find the life pod on fire. After subduing the flames and taking a look outside, he finds himself in the shallow water, not far from the massive crash remains of the Aurora. The Aurora crashed right smack dab on top of a giant dormant volcano. And it's a good thing it did too, because the rest of 4546b is made up nearly entirely of water, with only a few islands being visible from space. Everything that takes place in Subnautica takes place inside this massive volcanic crater. The endless deep ocean that surrounds the crater is known as the Void. And let's just say the Void is the worst place in existence. There is nothing for you there but death. As Riley explores the crater, he receives distress signals from the other survivors and a mysterious third party with cryptic messages. After investigating the distressed locations, he learns more about the passengers and this planet. Sadly, his attempts to save any of the survivors are all in vain, as the wildlife of this planet has gotten to them first. Now there's nothing left but their final words on PDAs. A few days after the crash, the Aurora's drive core explodes, turning the area around it into a radiation hot zone. Riley's next goal is to get inside the Aurora and fix the radiation leak from seeping out into the ocean. Once obtaining the radiation suit, Riley heads to the front of the Aurora, which is now accessible thanks to half the ship being blown away. Making his way through the wreckage, avoiding fires and cave crawlers, Riley finds the dive room. After restoring the drive core's integrity, Riley explores what little is left of the ill-fated starship. Riley finds the Aurora's black box, which gives a detailed timeline of events as to what happened. It also points out that Altera HQ sent rescue solutions to the captain's terminal. Unfortunately for Riley, the captain's quarters are code-locked. Whatever is in there will have to wait till later. After being stranded for several days, LifePod 5 is contacted by the trade vessel Sunbeam. The Sunbeam picked up the Aurora's debris field and is coming to the rescue. Riley is sent a set of coordinates from where the Sunbeam will meet. The coordinates lead to a giant mountain island with a weird alien building, which should be a sign of comfort. Unfortunately, Riley finds out exactly what happened to the Aurora firsthand.
Survivor, we see you. Man, I don't know how you held out down there. We broke an atmosphere, and we're descending towards the landing site. Is that a building down there? What do you mean you can't identify it? Hold on. No turning back now. Positions, everyone. Touching down in 10, 9, 8. It's coming from the building? Change course. Set thrusters to full.
This leads Riley to explore the alien space gun, as any hope of leaving the planet alive depends on disabling it. However, when Riley attempts to disable the mini Death Star, he is violently stabbed by a Doc Ock spike arm and labeled as infected. But infected with what? The alien facility location data is downloaded to Riley's PDA, which gives clues to where to find the next alien base. The closest is the Disease Research Facility, 800 meters down in a cave system filled with fossilized remains. Who are these strange aliens? Why did they build this space gun, and where did they go? Maybe this disease research facility will hold some answers. Riley's next goal is to upgrade his equipment and go deeper, all while being hunted by new enemies called Warpers, and a mysterious alien telepath calls out to him for the first time.
What are you?
After building a mobile vehicle bay, a message is sent by Second Officer Keen from LifePod 19, informing all survivors to rendezvous on a floating island. This island has been kept afloat by ancient giant floaters. For so long, the island has formed its own ecosystem. Riley arrives to find himself alone, but not before finding 3 abandoned bases. It is here that Riley discovers that the Aurora was not the first ship to crash on this planet. Mongolian Transgov ship known as the Degassi went missing 10 years prior. All the crew died except for 3. Paul Torgal, the CEO of the Torgal Corporation, and the Degassi captain. Bart Torgal, Paul's son, and the brilliant heir to the Torgal Empire, and one very badass Marguerite Maida, a mercenary for hire. But if they survived, where are they? Turns out that the Aurora had a second mission, and the real reason for coming to 4546B, to find any sign of the Degassi crew, and if possible, bring them home. The Degassi crew managed to wash up on the shore of the floating island after their ship crashed. Using the wreckage, they built their base and waited, trying to survive the best they could till help would arrive. They learned much about the island, including what was edible. Unfortunately, severe storms flooded their grow beds and a landslide buried their base.
Son, I said wait for the storm to pass. Your life's more valuable to me than a plant patch.
You stopped being in charge when the ship you were captaining sunk.
I'll stop being in charge when you take charge of yourself.
Say, Chief. Chief,
What?
do you know how to drain those grow beds of 40 tons of stormwater? Or how to conjure food from the air?
I know how to prioritize.
I'm just saying, if that's so, what's your boy's life worth, Chief, today? If tomorrow you're gonna be so hungry you start wondering what he tastes like, let him go deal with the plants.
Son, go deal with the plants.
Bard, Torgal has disembarked the habitat.
Interfere with my family again, and when rescue arrives, I will leave you here. Do you understand me?
No rescue coming, Chief. Not in time. No staying here neither. This rain keeps falling, sooner or later this place will be buried. Only choice we got is whether to get buried with it.
The Degassi crew went underwater, setting up a new base in the Jelly Shroom Caves. These caves are cut off from the rest of the ocean and located close to the shallows, making it ideal for staying away from Leviathan threats, while also being rich with resources. Giant crab snakes also make these caves their home, but are easy enough to avoid and can be fought off. Upon finding the Degassi base, it is left in ruin, much like the ones on the floating island. We learn from the PDAs there that not all is well with the crew's morale. As tensions grow between Paul and Marguerite, Bart finds a mysterious signal coming deep in the Grand Reef. Marguerite suspects it might have something to do with the strange orange tablet she found on the floater island, the giant space gun, and why they were shot down. The Degassi crew used the lithium in the caves to build a Cyclops and leave to investigate this strange signal. Remember that locked door in the Aurora? Well, now it's time to find out what's back there. Riley has sent a message from the Altera HQ. They learned of what happened and are sending help, but will only come halfway. This is most likely because there are no phase gates this far out yet, so Riley must meet them the rest of the way himself. To do this, they upload blueprints of the Neptune escape rocket to the captain's data terminal and supply Riley with the code to the captain's quarters. Riley goes back to the Aurora, unlocks the door, and downloads the Neptune escape rocket. This is it. This is the way off 4546B, but we can't leave yet, not while this space gun is still online. Somehow, Riley has to deactivate the space gun, but to do that, we have to find out more about what kind of illness he has and how to cure it. Riley heads to the Grand Reef to find the next Degassi base. It is here we learn the sad fate of the Degassi. While staying in the Grand Reef, Bart, Paul, and Maida all develop some sort of illness. The same illness currently afflicting Riley. Bart believes that this bacteria has infected every living thing on 4546B, but for some reason, the fauna seem to be thriving. Bart wants to learn more information about this pathogen and, if possible, find a cure from the local wildlife. But getting a live sample won't be easy.
Margaret, Maida has boarded the habitat.
What are you so happy about, Maida?
Say, kid, I brought you something.
Is that a Leviathan outside?
Towed it home on the back of the sub.
You killed that thing?
It's still breathing. I was about to finish the job, but I can stay and chat if you'd like. No? Then make yourself useful and pass me that hardened blade.
Are you out of your mind? You brought that thing here? What if it's not as dead as it looks? What if others come?
You prefer it got curious and came of its own accord, or got messed up and dragged here?
When we get off this planet, I am going to drag you through every court in the damn Federation. I have had it with you, risking our lives.
Oh, stow it, Chief. The kid can't kill this disease without fish to study. I'm just bringing him home.
But tell her. Tell her I'm right.
You're both wrong. Marguerite, I can't find out how they resist the bacteria if you slaughter them all.
It ain't always they oblige in coming in alive.
He means you're being reckless.
Father, the outcome's no better if we hole up in here and don't go outside. Look, we have to find a middle way.
There is no compromise. Not while she's on my sea base.
Your sea base?
I'm going outside.
Bart, Torgal has disembarked the habitat.
Bart, come in. It's dangerous. Damn it, boy. I know you can hear me.
Chief. Chief, get off the radio and put on your helmet.
What?
Brace!
In an attempt to help Bart, the Mad Lad Maida brings in a wounded, yet very much so alive, Reaper Leviathan to the base as a test subject. This goes about as well as can be expected, as the blood of the Reaper attracts another Reaper, which destroys the base and leaves the Degasi crew for dead. We know at the very least Maida is still alive during the events of Subnautica, as she appears in the sequel game Below Zero. She was last seen by Paul stabbing the Reaper Leviathan to death with a shard of metal. Bart also survives this encounter and returns to the floating island in his last effort to find a cure. His last known location were the Shallows. It is unlikely that he survived as the illness was taking him rapidly. It is believed that Paul Torgal died via drowning or by being eaten. After learning of the Degasi's grim fate, Riley finds the entrance to the Lost River, just below the Degasi base, and passing by the corpses of the giants that once dominated this world, he discovers the Precursor Disease Research Facility. It is here that the mysterious contagion is revealed, the Karar virus. The alien race that built this facility are referred to as the Precursors, once a powerful intergalactic species that dominated the Alpha Centauri galaxy. Riley finds information of this race on data downloads throughout the Precursor bases. Their very presence on 4546b was to study the Karar virus. The virus was accidentally discovered in a routine expansion of the Precursor's territory. It's unlikely they realized they were infected until it was too late, as the virus shows no symptoms at first, not for a few days at least. The Karar nearly wiped out their whole race, and so any planet infected with the Karar was quarantined by them. They moved samples of the virus to 4546b and built research facilities. This facility was meant to contain the virus and perform tests in a controlled environment. One such test involved the egg of a sea dragon Leviathan, which did not go as planned. The mother sea dragon tracked the egg to the disease research facility, and using its own body, attempted to smash into the facility to rescue its precious offspring. This is the catalyst for everything that transpires in Subnautica. The sea dragon later dies from its self-inflicted wounds, but not before destroying the research facility and inadvertently releasing the Karar virus from the containment, allowing it to spread unhindered to the rest of the planet, wiping out what remained of the Precursor race. Their final act was to build the quarantine enforcement platform to make sure that anyone unfortunate enough to land on 4546b would never be allowed to leave. Once the Karar has fully manifested itself inside of Riley, coordinates to the alien thermal plant are uploaded to his PDA. Preparing the Cyclops for the downward descent to the closest thing to hell he will ever see, Riley heads to the inactive lava zone. The inactive lava zone is made of molten rock spires. In the middle is a giant obsidian lava castle, built by the Precursors to protect the thermal plant from the sea dragons. Once Riley finds the plant, he unlocks the blue Precursor tablet, which is needed for the primary containment facility. Once acquiring the blue tablet, Riley gets another telepathic message. Who is this mysterious being? Could it be one of the Precursors? Whoever it is, they are waiting for us down here. Before leaving, Riley activates an arc gate to the quarantine enforcement platform. This will be useful later. Making his way back to the Cyclops, Riley descends to the deepest part of the crater. The Precursors knew more about the Karar than any other being in the universe. If there is a cure, information on it would have to be here. The telepathic messenger contacts Riley yet again, this time telling Riley that they are who he seeks. A bit perplexing, since we are seeking a cure. Could this being be the cure we seek? Once reaching the primary containment facility, Riley walks past trophies and relics from other worlds, showing the vast knowledge and influence the Precursor race held. They had even visited Earth when humanity was still a primitive race. Riley finds a containment tank in the center of this complex and enters the containment tank, meeting face to face with the one who has been telepathically leading us to this point. A 2,600-year-old Sea Emperor Leviathan, and possibly the last of its kind, as the Karar virus has wiped out its species' food source. The Sea Emperor species naturally produced an enzyme that neutralized the Karar. Ironically, the Precursors found the one species in the universe that could cure this ailment. But by bringing the virus to 4546b, the Karar threatened to wipe out the very beings that could stop it. It's revealed that the Sea Emperor Leviathan is too old to produce strong enough enzyme to cure the Karar, and that only younger members of her species would be able to produce a strong enough enzyme to stop it completely. The Leviathan is the mother of 6 emperor eggs, which is the last hope for her species and for a cure. Unfortunately, the precursors tried to forcefully hatch one of the sea emperor eggs, but this ended up killing the baby emperor. This is the reason why the precursors stole a sea dragon egg to study the hatching cycle. Since the sea dragons and sea emperors had a common ancestor at one point, the aliens believed that they could apply similar conditions to the sea emperor eggs. Sadly, this ended in the worst case scenario. The sea emperor Leviathan tried to tell the precursors what needed to be done, but they could not hear her. But Riley can. The Sea Emperor has stayed alive for over 1,000 years by sheer willpower alone, just to tell someone, anyone, about the hatching enzyme. Now that is what being a mom is all about. The ancient beast of the sea gives Riley the formula for the hatching enzyme. Using the arc gates within the containment facility, Riley journeys to different parts of the crater and collects all the ingredients necessary. Once all the ingredients are gathered, he returns and enters them into the incubator. After successfully hatching, the baby sea emperors escape to the shallows, where they spread the enzyme throughout the rest of the planet. The long-lived sea emperor thanks Riley before finally letting go, now that her mission has been accomplished. Once Riley gets his hands on that sweet, sweet cure, it's finally time to turn off the enforcement platform, build that rocket, and leave this nightmare of a planet behind. Hopefully, never to see it again.
What is a wave without the ocean? A beginning without an end. They are different, but they go together. Now you go among the stars, and I fall among the sand. We are different, but we go together.
There are 4 different game modes in Subnautica. Survival mode gives the player 4 meters to monitor: clean water, food, health, and oxygen. The player starts out with a med kit, some nutrition blocks, and filtered water. But these are basically reminders that there is a time limit. You have to figure out how to make your own food and clean water eventually. You also have to find out how to keep food and water on hand when going on missions. Freedom mode is like survival mode, but instead of 4 meters, you only have to worry about your health and oxygen. This mode is more so to enjoy the story, without the hassle of always managing food and water. Everything else is the same as survival mode. Hardcore mode is, well, hardcore. It's survival mode, only you get 1 life, and if you die, well then that's it. Creative mode is for those who just want to have fun and explore unhindered. In this mode, you get infinite resources, can't be harmed, and can build all items in the game immediately. You can do some crazy stuff in this mode. There are 20 different biomes in Subnautica. The Safe Shallows is the first biome in the game that the player gets to explore. There is a plethora of flora and fauna here, and is draped in gorgeous giant coral reefs. Life Pod 5 will always spawn somewhere in the Safe Shallows. There is an abundance of acid shrooms, which is needed for batteries and power cells. Despite being named the Safe Shallows, there are still some creatures to watch out for. Gasopods are large manatee-like creatures. They feed off the abundant flora in the shallows, including acid shrooms. They have a large round body with dark, leathery-like plated skin and a pulsating tail full of corrosive gas pods. They can be seen in groups swimming about passively. However, if approached by enemies, they will release their gas pods as a defense mechanism. The gas pods are formed from a type of algae stored inside a specialized algae gland. This gland seems to be a way to incubate the algae from the gasopod's waste, most likely consisting of acid shrooms, which is then stored and released if threatened. The gasopods are immune to their own gas pods thanks to their thick, non-reactive hide and a special mouth with multiple gills which filter out its own gas. Their gas mask-like face was inspired by a Russian GP5 gas mask. The gas pods themselves can be picked up by Riley if he is fast enough and used for the gas torpedoes later. Another creature to look out for is the crash fish. They have a round body with many spike-like fins in the back that resemble a pufferfish. They have only 1 giant eye that they use to monitor their surroundings. These guys live in the shallow caves and are extremely protective of them. They live inside the sulfur plants and will literally protect them with their life. This is because if Riley or anything else they perceive as a threat comes near their home, they will violently swim towards their target and explode, dealing significant damage. Yeah, not sure how this species has avoided natural selection, But perhaps this method of defense has made it so predators know not to mess with them, unless they are prepared for mutual destruction. Once they are gone, they will leave behind the sulfur plant, which can be used in crafting materials. The kelp forest is the close neighbor to the safe shallows. It's distinguished by the creep vine clusters that give it its name. The creep vine plant itself is used for silicone rubber and lubricant. The somewhat aggressive stalkers make the creep vine forest their home. Stalkers are fairly intelligent compared to most creatures on this planet. They have long, smooth bodies, large spinal fins, and a thin snout lined with razor-sharp teeth. Stalkers look like a fusion of a gharial crocodile and a swordfish. An evolved form of stalker shows up in Below Zero. These stalkers are called snow stalkers. Unlike the aquatic stalkers, these stalkers have grown fur from their scales and live primarily on land. Snow stalkers seem to be more intelligent as well, and unlike their aquatic counterparts, can be fully tamed. Stalkers have a knack for picking up scrap metal and bringing it back to their nests. They use the scrap metal to sharpen and strengthen their teeth, which can break off. Stalker teeth are needed for enameled glass, which is needed for many important blueprints. The stalkers will attack Riley if given the chance, but they can be dealt with in a number of ways. Feeding the stalkers, for instance, can temporarily tame them. You can get stalker teeth by dropping scrap metal or by making the stalkers bite your seam off. You can kill stalkers fairly easily, but killing them won't drop anything. If you can find a stalker's nest, you can find a bunch of scrap metal and a lot of stalker teeth as well. One very interesting creature that is found in the kelp forest is the mesmer. The mesmers live in the kelp caves. These guys can hypnotize prey into passively swimming towards it, allowing it to take a bite out of the unassuming prey. This ability is most likely both a self-defense mechanism from large predators and a way to prey on larger creatures that normally would be able to defend themselves. The grassy plateaus are defined by the large plains of bloodgrass and the giant peaceful reefbacks grazing on algae. Reefbacks are huge filter feeders that dominate these open waters, simply by being too massive for any predator to prey upon. Reefbacks seem to fill the same niche that great blue whales fill here on Earth. They move slowly through the water, allowing microscopic organisms to pass by. It's not fully explained how they filter out their food, but there are these giant tube-like organs on their underside that is most likely how they breathe, eat, and make their welcoming sounds. The reefbacks are called reefbacks because of the mini ecosystems on their large shovel-like carapace. They have 3 long tendrils in the back, which is most likely how they move their large bodies. These giants are as alien as they come, breaking all conventional norms for life even on this planet. They don't appear to have eyes, ears, nose, or even a mouth. Really not even a face. How they see where they are going might be by feeling the waves on their skin, or maybe even through sonar. Despite this, reefbacks are very social and move in herds of 3 or more. They emit a low-frequency call, which is used to communicate with other reefbacks. Juvenile reefbacks are much smaller and have not yet rented out their backside to tenants. It's possible that reefbacks are poisonous because underneath them seems to be the same kind of algae gland that gasopods possess. Unlike gasopods though, reefbacks do not release gas pods. It's possible that at one point, they were preyed on by much larger creatures. Perhaps they still are elsewhere beyond the crater. Maybe they store this algae here as a defense mechanism, making them poisonous to eat. Whatever the case, the sound of a reefback is one of the most welcoming sounds in the game. Sand sharks are also in abundance here. These predators use their very odd fins to burrow into the sand and wait to ambush unassuming prey. Sand sharks have a somewhat resemblance to the ancient skull in the Lost River, possibly an ancestor to the sand shark species. The biter is also found in this biome. These creatures are able to smell blood at an alarming distance, and despite their size, have a powerful bite, which is why they are called biters. They are comparable to Earth's piranhas. The crash zone is the final destination of the Aurora and most of its crew. The water here is murky from all the sand being stirred from the impact of the Aurora. Metal debris is scattered throughout the zone. It is advised to simply just not go here, because the crash zone is constantly being patrolled by 9 Reaper Leviathans. Reapers are roughly the size of a Cyclops and extremely aggressive. They have a lean, muscular body with 2 sets of flukes on their tail. They have 4 large mandibles connected to their jaws, which will grab hold of prey and allow the Reaper to tear into it using its rows of razor-sharp teeth. Reapers have a set of flat, long vestigial fins underneath their torso, which is most likely used to help them swim in a straight line. They have 4 eyes and a giant, blunt red horn on top of their heads, most likely for ramming other Reapers or even larger predators. The PDA file on Reapers reads that Reapers are almost all muscle, very little brain, no sense of morality, just muscle, synapses, and teeth. Also, their roar acts as a sonar. If you can hear it, the Reaper can hear you. So yeah, this thing's terrifying. This is one of those zones where it's just don't go here. Just leave it alone. You don't need to go here. There's nothing here. Just leave it. The crag field is located on the edge of the crater and connects to the crash zone. This biome is riddled with rocky slopes and canyons. Bone sharks are the prominent predators here. Bone sharks have a thick exoskeleton of armor. They possess a row of sharp teeth which they use to crush their prey, but these teeth are actually part of their hard skeleton, rather than part of their mouth. They move slowly through the water to preserve energy, but will attack anything they perceive as a threat or prey with incredible speed. Bone sharks are some of the most abundant and adaptive life forms on 4546b. They can be found in many different biomes, including the crag field, the floating island, and the bulb zone. But they also could overlap into other biomes as well, which makes them one of the most common aggressive creatures on the planet. One interesting item that can be picked up here is the Markiplier bobblehead, located in Life Pod 7. This item was added in the game as a way to thank Markiplier for his help promoting the game. Definitely one of the cooler items to be picked up. The bulb zone is located on the opposite side of the Aurora and is also located on the crater's edge. This biome is noted for its bulb plants, which give it its name. It's also one of the few places to find the sea crown, which is one of the rarest plants in the game and is needed for Enzyme 42. This zone is one of the more dangerous zones to go to, with Reapers surrounding the borders of the zone and bone sharks patrolling throughout. What really makes this zone so dangerous, though, is the amp eel. These creatures are extremely dangerous to both the sea moth and the cyclops. They have a segmented eel-like body with rows of prong-like fins. Their bodies produce high bioelectrical charge, which they can use to attack the player and the vehicles. They also can bite as well. What really makes them so dangerous, though, is they are often in groups and are able to follow Riley into small spaces. So yeah, Bulb Zone is definitely not the best place to visit. The Blood Kelp Zone is located in 2 different areas. The actual Blood Kelp biome is located past the Mushroom Forest and connects to the dunes and the crater's edge. This zone is literally nightmare fuel. There are these giant blood vines that ooze out blood oil. Blood oil is used to craft benzene. The top of the blood vines look like a creepy mouth or something else I can't say. Not only is it creepy as hell, but also has amp eels, bone sharks, crab squids, and a ghost leviathan. If you thought the Reaper was bad, this thing is straight out of nightmares. An adult ghost leviathan makes Reapers look like a stalker. These things are massive and horrifying to listen to. The ghost leviathan lay their eggs in the Lost River biome, where they hatch and spend their juvenile life. Here they stay for a while, hunting amp eels and crab squids before making their way out into the void. They seem to be lacking any kind of conventional skeleton, and instead have a cartilage-like membrane surrounding their interior nervous system. Their giant head is shaped like a hammer for ramming. They do have what appears to be vestigial fins on their sides, which would aid in their control in the water, but they move through the water more akin to an eel, using their massive tail to curl up and spring through the water at great speeds. They don't seem to have teeth for chewing, so it's likely ghosts eat their prey whole, similarly to earth snakes. Yikes. Ghost leviathans have 12 eyes, and their bodies produce bioluminescence, most likely to attract small creatures to them while in the dark void. Ghost leviathan's life cycle is very unique. As a juvenile, the ghost will eat any and everything it can in its surrounding area, including smaller ghost leviathans themselves, until it grows so large that it can't sustain itself in the crater, in which case it will head out into the void. Here it adapts to being a filter feeder and feeding off zooplankton for the rest of its life. It will then keep growing and feeding, most likely till it grows so large that its body simply can't sustain itself and dies. Despite that these creatures will kill Riley and pretty much anything that moves, the adult ghosts only attack other large life forms out of territorial need. So know that if you are being chased by one, at least they aren't killing you for food. That makes things a whole lot better, I'm sure. The second blood kelp zone is more like a sub-biome. It is located between the sparse reef, the sea treader's path, and the dunes. This zone is riddled with caves and is one of the ways to get into the Lost River. A variation of the cave crawlers called the blood crawlers infest the blood caves. They have very long legs and are very creepy, but mostly not an issue. Warpers and at least one amp eel that I could find are here as well, but this blood kelp zone is far safer than the other. A variation of the biter is also located down here called the blighter. This little fella has adapted to the darkness and has lost the use of sight. They are less aggressive but will still attack if approached, so best to just avoid them. The underwater islands are located right beside the large blood kelp zone and the mountains. The only threats here are bone sharks and cave crawlers. However, considering that it's wedged between two of the more dangerous biomes, caution is advised when entering and exiting this zone. It gets its name from the giant floating islands found throughout. Giant floaters cling to large objects which allow them to have buoyancy. These same floaters are what allow the floating islands to float. They latch onto objects, usually organic, and feed off the nutrients they supply. They can also feed from decomposed soil or living creatures. Their bodies produce a thin layer of helium, which allow them to float. Floating things like rocks closer to the surface encourage moss and other plant growth to form. Similar to jellyfish here on Earth, floaters don't really seem to age like other creatures. They just seem to grow bigger. This could explain how the giant floaters which keep the floating island up are so massive. They could very well be the oldest living things in the game. The mountains are located beside the underwater islands and the bulb zone. This is a vital biome to Subnautica, or at least the sub-biome the mountain island is. The biome itself is filled with small rocky hills. Once again, Reapers patrol this area, so be careful when entering and leaving. The moon pool to the quarantine enforcement platform is located underwater. Speaking of the platform, next we have the mountain island itself. This island may very well be the most important location in the game. It's the site of the quarantine enforcement platform and the final resting place for the would-be rescuers aboard the Sunbeam. The only real threat here are cave crawlers, which are basically spider crabs. There are also these bird-like things flying around. Turns out these things are actually rays. At some point, these guys left the ocean and began to rely on dry land for food. Since really no other creature can fly in Subnautica, these guys might be the most successful species at self-preservation. Instead of making most of their bodies into eyeballs, they simply took themselves out of the food chain. They are also an omen of good luck, because if you see any of them around the ocean, there most likely is dry land somewhere nearby. The quarantine enforcement platform itself has a arc gate to the inactive lava zone thermal plant. Inside the mountain is another arc gate to the floating island. The floating island is located on the other side of the map in the Grand Reef biome. What's cool about this biome is that you can unlock a ton of blueprints and food items. This island was the home to the Degassi survivors after they crashed. Again, cave crawlers are the only real threats here. The island itself is held up by giant ancient floaters. How this island came to be is insane. Somehow, maybe thousands of years ago, enough floaters attached onto this underwater island and brought it to the surface. Perhaps it was once part of the sea treader's path. Once on the surface, plant life began to grow and die, in which case the biological waste was absorbed through the soil. The floaters get their nutrients from the soil and in return allow the island to float, so the plant life photosynthesize its food from the starlight. It's actually really cool how much thought went into this kind of stuff. Since we're here, let's go ahead and dive into the Grand Reef is located right underneath the floating island. It's noted for its many interesting flora, like the anchor pods and membrane trees, which look a lot like crab squid eggs. I mentioned crab squids before. Well, the Grand Reef is home to many crab squids. They hang out in the deep Grand Reef. These creatures look similar to Earth octopuses, but don't let this fool you. They are nothing alike. Where octopuses have a relatively large brain and are made up of cartilage, crab squids have a translucent chitinous outer shell, and their large heads actually contain their stomach. Yeah, they literally think with their stomach. Crab squids have more similarities to crustaceans than squids. They have 8 segmented legs and 2 small claws in the front. What is most annoying about these guys is they generate an EMP blast. which will drain your vehicles of power. They are a nuisance and one of the few enemies I will go out of my way to kill, especially the one hanging around the 3rd Degasi base. Speaking of, the Deep Grand Reef is the last location found of the Degasi crew. It is also where you can find the orange precursor tablet and the cuttlefish. The cuttlefish was originally a reward for those who bought the game early. There are 5 cuttlefish eggs spread throughout the game. They are the only companions Riley can get in the game as well. Originally, they were meant to blow up against enemies like the crash fish, but this was later changed. They have a round, fat body with 5 tentacles in the back. They seem to share the same evolutionary body type as some other creatures in the game, perhaps as a result of convergent evolution. According to the PDA, cuttlefish have empathy, some level of sentience, and a high intellect, which is different from the vast majority of creatures on this planet. It is possible that this species may have been on the verge of extinction from another world, and the last remaining eggs of its kind were brought to 4546b by the precursors in hopes of repopulation. This would explain why they are domesticated, since they can't be raised outside of a containment. They can be brought along with Riley and interacted with, but they are completely optional. Cute little fellas though. Anyway, 2 adult ghost leviathans are also present in this biome. One of them likes to hang out near the Sea Treader's Path. The Sea Treader's Path is located between the dunes and the Grand Reef. Its name comes from the sea treaders that migrate from the Grand Reef to the dunes. Where they go after this is anyone's guess. Maybe they climb down into the void, but it's more likely that they use the dunes for mating, then take the Sea Treader's Path back to the Grand Reef where they lay their eggs and start the whole process over. Sea Treaders are passive so long as the player stays away from the group. Sea Treaders are also very unique creatures. They move about the seafloor using their 2 back legs and their long jointed beaks as a 3rd leg. They use his mouth beak as both a defensive measure and to graze on the plant life along the path. They possess 2 large antennae, which they use to smell and sense their surroundings. Their sense of smell is astounding. Not only can they sense others of their kind, they can also sense food and predators miles away. They have a thick armored carapace, which protects them from most predators. They keep their young inside the herd and travel in a straight line in case reapers or ghosts try to pick them off. Sea treaders also have compound eyes, which make them very different from most creatures on this planet. They seem to have more in common with Earth arthropods. Sea treaders leave behind feces when they walk, which helps to fertilize the soil and promotes regrowth of the plant life. Honestly, one of my favorite creatures in the game. By the way, you can actually pick up their poop and use it, so yeah. The dunes are connected to the Sea Treader's Path and the Mushroom Forest. Once again, I encourage you to stay away from this biome. The dunes are a wasteland of sand and rock. Much like the crash zone, the dunes are murky, even during the day, and are infested with Reaper Leviathans. There are many small and large craters throughout the zone. This is because thousands of years prior, a meteorite crashed here. The impact site of the meteor is also where Riley can find one of the alien caches. Smaller craters are abundant in resources as well. A cuttlefish egg and sea crowns are also found in this biome. If you feel brave enough, the dunes definitely do have some nice resources hidden within its craters. But honestly,
detecting multiple Leviathan class life forms in the region. Are you certain whatever you're doing is worth it?
the Mushroom Forest is located in 2 locations. The first forest is between the dunes and the grassy plateaus. This mushroom forest is actually fairly dangerous if not careful. Bone sharks tend to wander into this zone from the underwater islands. Jelly rays are the predominant life forms here. These guys share the same ancestors as all other ray species on the planet. The forest itself is made up of a type of coral. A sample of this coral is needed for enzyme 42. The second mushroom forest is located directly under the front of the aurora. While safer, there is still a chance for some bone sharks and even a reaper to wander into the zone. For the most part though, these zones are pretty safe. The jelly shroom caves are located underneath the safe shallows, kelp forest, and grassy plateaus. The entrance to the caves is found in the grassy plateaus themselves. These caves are filled with jelly shrooms, giant glowing fungi, and the source of all light down here. Crab snakes make these caves their home. They lay in wait inside the jelly shrooms for unassuming prey, then spring out to catch it with its 2 front fangs. Crab snakes are long magenta-colored ambush predators. They have a square-shaped mouth with 2 top and bottom teeth and 2 protruding fangs. They have no eyes and most likely use smell and touch to see. They have long ribbon-like fins that run down either side of their bodies. These guys are essential to the jelly shroom caves, and it's the only place in the game to find them. Honestly, they are scary, but easy enough to avoid. The second Degassi base is also found here. This cave system is a delicate balance of symbiosis. Smaller fauna, like the oculus, will feed off the soft jelly tissue of the jelly shrooms. The crab snakes who live inside will spring out and eat the oculus. Whatever remains sinks to the soil and fertilizes the jellies, allowing them to grow and thus keeping the cycle going. The sparse reef is located between the grassy plateaus and the Grand Reef. While this biome is eerie as hell, it is actually the safest biome in the game, with the only real threat being tiger plants. These plants really don't want to be eaten, because if any predator approaches it, the plant will fire spikes at the nearest target. The sparse reef is a pretty good location for farming resources, and not a bad place for a base. The sparse reef is also a way into the blood kelp caves, which connect to the Lost River. Is one of the largest biomes in the game in terms of length. There are 4 different entrances to the Lost River: the Blood Kelp Zone 1, Blood Kelp Zone 2, the Bulb Zone, and the Deep Grand Reef. There is a lot to go over here, so let's get started. The Lost River can be considered the beginning of the final act of Subnautica. Getting down here is an achievement. The Lost River has many subbiomes and is the location of the Alien Disease Research Facility and an alien cache. Several large skeletal remains are found here as well, one of which is the gargantuan fossil. This thing died here 3 million years prior to the events of Subnautica. The PDA tells us that if this creature were still alive today, then it would be half the size of the entire crater, or half the size of the entire map. Like, bro, no thank you. It is likely that this thing probably came from the void. Perhaps it fed off ghosts or even emperor leviathans. Somehow this thing found its way into the Lost River, and most likely due to its size, got trapped and died here. The sheer size of this creature's decaying body was enough raw material to create an entire ecosystem over time, with flora and fauna adapting to this brine-rich environment. There is another gargantuan skull located near the Lost River Junction, so the theory that these creatures probably hunted ghost leviathans seem more legit. They most likely chased the ghost down into the Lost River caves and died. Who's to say these giant monsters aren't still alive somewhere out there in the deep void? Fortunately, we don't have to find out. But these aren't the only ancient creatures found here. There's an ancient skull located by the alien cache. This thing looks to have been related to the sand shark due to the segmented fins or legs. Perhaps this creature was more closely related to a worm or centipede type of creature. It most likely lived in the Lost River, and maybe even burrowed through the ground, making some of the tunnels down here. Whatever the case, so glad it's dead. There are a couple of creatures down here to watch out for. One is the river prowler. These guys are long, translucent predators that feed on smaller creatures. They look creepy, but they are pretty easy to avoid. However, the thing that preys on them is not. The ghost leviathan is back, only this time it's the juvenile. One of these guys hang out around the gargantuan fossil. There are others, but this one is the worst, and the only time I went out of my way to kill a leviathan. All I wanted to do was scan the skull. That's it. That's all I wanted to do, but it just would not leave me alone. So it had to die. The Lost River also has its own variation of ray called ghost rays. They mostly hang out near the tree Cove, which is the home of the giant cove tree. This tree is where the ghost leviathans lay their eggs. The eggs here all seem to be at different points of development. It is stated in the PDA file that the cove tree grew around the ghost eggs. Perhaps the eggs give the cove tree some kind of nutrients, and in exchange the tree protects them. When the eggs hatch, the tree most likely is destroyed, and its seeds drop to the ground, planting a new cove tree in its place. Perhaps the ghost rays also play a part in the tree's growth. This delicate symbiosis has led to one of the most impactful influences affecting the waters of the crater, as the ghost leviathans play a crucial role in the ecosystem. Considering that this is the only cove tree in the game, and how much space is here, it is likely that only 3 ghost leviathans are born at a time. This is further supported by the fact that there are 3 juvenile ghosts in the Lost River, and 3 adult ghosts outside of it, 2 in the Grand Reef, and 1 in the Blood Kelp Zone. As 3 ghosts are born, 3 also leave the Lost River and go into the crater. And as 3 go into the crater, 3 leave the crater and go into the void. This all seems to represent the different stages of the ghost's life cycle. When considering that there can be 3 ghosts that spawn in the void, it is likely that the ghost leviathan's generations come in groups of 3. Also, since ghost leviathans never stop growing and eventually grow too big for the Lost River, it is likely that the juvenile ghost leviathans not just feed to get bigger down here, but may actually be the ones to lay the eggs in the cove tree before leaving. I don't see how a void leviathan could possibly make it back down here. And if you take into consideration that ghost juveniles will eat everything, including their own kind, this would mean that the ghost in the void would have to be ancient, since at the most only 3 are born at a time, which somehow just makes them even more terrifying. Oh yeah, there are also Reaper remains down here as well, so that means something dragged them down here and killed them. So yeah, think about that for a minute. The only 2 entrances to the inactive lava zone are located in the Lost River as well, and is somewhat still active. Here we will find many new creatures, one of which is the Crimson Ray. They are basically red versions of the Ghost Ray. Considering how close Ghost Rays are to the inactive lava zone, it is likely that these 2 species splintered off at some point, with some Ghost Rays seeking out heat, moving into the inactive lava zone corridor, and over time evolving into the Crimson Rays. Lava larvae are these cute little grub-like leeches that you just want to reach out and pet. Placing about 10 of these good boys to your Cyclops or Seamoth gives 1,000% power boost. They survive by selflessly giving power and heat to others. Definitely not anything to worry about. The lava lizard is basically a Dodongo from Zelda. These creatures have developed rock-like scar tissue, which allow them to swim near and even in the magma in this biome. They have a very unique split mouth that doesn't appear to be connected with a fused jaw. When they open their mouth, the lower jaw expands and retracts. Their teeth are also made to grip its prey rather than chewing it. This means that these guys most likely swallow their prey whole. Lava lizards have an odd-shaped dorsal fin and web-like fingers attached to a somewhat muscular yet short arms. These arms may be vestigial remains of a once more pronounced appendages. They can also fire lava spit from their mouths, so yeah, best probably to avoid these. On the zone floor, we see even more Reaper remains. What could possibly kill a Reaper? In comes the Sea Dragon Leviathan, the deadliest predator in Subnautica. These guys are massive, and other than the Emperor Leviathan, are the largest creatures in the game. They have 2 long, powerful arms for grabbing its prey, and long, powerful jaws for crushing and tearing. The PDA states that the sea dragon will often venture out into cooler waters like the mountains, and for smaller leviathans like Reapers, deeper until they are boiled alive, then eat them. Like, bro literally wants his food cooked. Aside from the fact that these guys can one-shot Riley with their bites, they can also spit fireballs. So basically Squid Godzilla. They feed mostly on Reapers, but due to deep sea gigantism, probably don't need to eat as much as you'd think. This is a phenomena that we see even on our own oceans. There are many reasons why a creature may grow larger the deeper they go, but one of the reasons is to preserve energy in the face of limited resources. The larger a creature gets means it's more unlikely that a creature will starve to death. The smaller the creature is, the more energy they have to consume. This is seen in a lot of rodents, where their heart beats way too fast and they need to eat constantly or else they'll die. Sea dragons may only have to eat like once or twice a year, perhaps stockpiling on Reapers and then coming back down to the inactive lava zone. Thank God these guys are only found this deep, but the fact that they can go to the surface is still terrifying. The lava castle in the middle of this zone is where the thermal plant is located. This giant castle was either made by or repurposed by the precursors to protect the power plant from sea dragons. Directly underneath the inactive lava zone, we have the active lava zone, or the lava lakes. This biome is home to more sea dragons, lava lizards, and crimson rays. It is also the location of the containment facility where the Emperor Leviathan is imprisoned. This species is the largest in the whole series that we have seen still alive. They share many characteristics to the sea dragons. However, sea emperors are filter feeders much like ghost leviathans, which may explain why they grew so big. They have long, paddle-like fins attached to muscular arms. It's likely that sea emperors used to have arms much like the sea dragons, but since they evolved to become filter feeders, they no longer needed to grab hold of large prey. and so their arms were reshaped to better fit the need to paddle through vast distances of water. They have 4 eyes like most other creatures on this planet, and a crab-like mouth with mandibles on the side. They still possess the long tendrils that sea dragons have, but slightly different in shape. Apparently, most of them died out due to their food source going extinct due to the Karar, yet somehow, juvenile emperors are fine. Perhaps their food source almost got wiped out, but like most other creatures on this planet, they started to build resistance to the virus and bounced back in the last 1,000 years since they had no predators to hunt them. Anyways, that's it for the biomes in Subnautica. There were plans for an Arctic zone, however this would later be added into Subnautica Below Zero. Each biome is unique in its own way. The Sea Treader's path is completely optional, yet no matter what Riley's doing, the Sea Treaders will always be moving on this path. It's little things like this that make Subnautica so intriguing and so lived in. It feels like a real world you're on, with its own history, its own culture, its own creatures. The giant floaters that make the floating islands float are the same life forms spotted throughout the game attached to rocks. Another example is a giant skeletal remain in the Lost River. These creatures never show up in game, but just knowing these creatures once existed adds so much intrigue and lore to this planet. Also, the Reaper remains are really cool as well. To think that there is a creature that hunts the dreaded Reaper Leviathan, it's great foreshadowing that there are more dangers still to come. Subnautica has some great music as well. The soundtrack for the game was created by Simon Shalinsky, and he did a phenomenal job. Sadly, he was fired from Unknown Worlds before the game was fully released due to internal conflict, which I will not be going over in this video. The soundtrack has a sci-fi synthwave sound to it, which really does captivate the otherworldly feeling to being underwater. Whether it's high energy or calm and relaxing, the soundtrack has it all. I have been using many of the tracks in this video to better capture the feeling of the game for you guys. If you buy the Subnautica game, you actually get the soundtrack with it, which is really cool. Lots of great songs in this game. Okay, now on to the mechanics. The whole game of Subnautica can be summed up in one word: simplicity. The first command the player gets is to pick up a fire extinguisher to extinguish the fire in Life Pod 5. This is the same method of picking up and using items throughout the whole game. Something I really appreciate about Subnautica is there's very little hand-holding. The player is trusted to figure things out for themselves and is rewarded for doing so. All of the controls are very simple, and yet there is so many different mechanics at play. You can craft tools, scan objects, build complex bases, customize an aquarium, customize a vehicle, and so much more. Yet all these mechanics are relatively easy to both understand and manage. It becomes second nature after a few hours of playing to always take a repair tool with your Seamoth, always bring a spare battery, always making sure to throw some acid shrooms into the bioreactor. But none of these things are necessary. It's just some of the things I naturally started doing while playing. As soon as a player is in the water, it is complete and total freedom. But don't let the freedom fool you, because Subnautica is a surprisingly linear game. Yes, you can go anywhere you want, so long as you have the oxygen, but eventually you will have to follow the story to progress. Even if you somehow manage to get all the way down to the active lava zone before the sun being exploding, the story elements would still trigger. There is no map to show where you are. You have to get creative with the landmarks. Placing beacons is a great way to save locations for later, but the game gives enough waypoints in the form of other life pods to ensure the player always has an idea where they are. The compass helps with this as well, but is completely optional. Honestly, traversing the game is one of the highlights of my time playing. Getting to find the Sea Treader's path by accident and going through all the blood kelp cave systems was a joy. Everything the player learns is through self-discovery, and I love it. Now yes, Subnautica isn't the first game to do this. Minecraft, for example, has an open world that can be explored at any time, anywhere, but it is also randomly generated. Subnautica is not. This means that everything in Subnautica has a purpose. Every item, creature, plant, and rock was intentionally placed where it was placed. For instance, we know where the Aurora is because it's the largest structure on the map. We can use the placement of the Aurora to tell what biome we are in. The player also learns what biomes connect to each other, which helps players plan trips around dangerous biomes, such as the dunes or the crash zone. There are many ways to traverse the waters of Subnautica. The main form will be the Seamoth. It's the earliest vehicle you can get in the game, and the best for traveling to hard-to-reach areas. It is also extremely useful to strategically use the Seamoth as a way to replenish oxygen when Riley is too deep to reach the surface. The prawn suit is used more for the dangerous areas, and it's one of the few ways to actually harm the enemies in the game. The prawn suit is also surprisingly mobile and is able to fly through the waters with the jump boost. The prawn suit has 5 different arms, which can be used for a multitude of reasons. The torpedo arm is used to discourage enemies. The repulsor arm is used to move objects and can be used to repel enemies. The grapple arm is used to grapple over a short distance and is a nice way to give the jump boost a break without losing one's placement. The regular arm is used for breaking and picking up objects, and the drill arm is used for drilling the large mineral deposits, and is by far the most effective way of killing enemies. Seriously, you can even kill leviathans with enough time. You can dual wield any combination of arms to meet your needs. I find the grapple arm and drill arm combo is the best way to go if taking on a Reaper. Now, I love the prawn suit, but it is not without its own major flaws. One of those flaws is the prawn suit has to be literally right on top of an object to pick it up. I find it faster to just get out of the prawn suit, swim over to the object I just broke with my arm, and pick it up myself, and then get back in the prawn suit, which is kind of a hassle, especially when you're in a dangerous area where you really don't want to be out of your prawn suit. Lastly, there is the Cyclops. The Cyclops becomes invaluable in the later parts of the game, and is essentially a moving base with its own moon pool. You can dock both the Seamoth or the prawn suit inside to take with you for later. The Cyclops has a ton of upgrades as well. Some are more useful than others, like the shield. One major complaint I have with the Cyclops is sometimes it would get stuck on a rock, and no matter what I did, it would not move. I noticed this happened to me more so in the grassy plateaus and in the sparse reef, but it has happened to me in the Cragfield and also in the Great Grand Reef as well. It's probably just a bug with the game, and it's rare and usually avoidable, so I'm not going to let it bother me too much. But it is still a flaw. One of the most impactful aspects of the game is the feeling of complete loneliness. Whether it was intentional or not, the lack of another player or NPC adds to the dread of being stranded on an alien world. When help is on its way, it gets dashed in an instant. You could say that Subnautica does a good job of enticing existential horror. Being stranded anywhere with no hope of leaving invokes a powerful feeling of existentialism. Speaking of horror, Subnautica just oozes thalassophobia, which is the fear of large bodies of water, or the fear of not knowing what lies beneath the waves. As a person with this fear, Subnautica tapped into my phobia instantly. When I first got the game in 2015, I remember I got as far as the Aurora, heard the Reaper for the first time, and no joke, I was so terrified that I closed the game and I didn't play it for a month. I didn't even see the Reaper, I just heard it. Developers knew exactly what they were doing, man. Till this day, I avoid going to the crash site, and I will go on record saying it's one of the most terrifying levels of any game I have ever played. Another thing I am terrified to do is getting too close to the crater edge. I know exactly what's out there, and I don't want it. The creators have went on record saying that it was not their intent to make this game scary, but they did such a great job at showing just how terrifying the ocean can be. The journey starts in the shallows with little at the player's disposal. At the most, a fabricator and a single storage unit is all the player has to work with from the start. From these humble beginnings, we spend the first few hours of the game exploring and understanding the shallows, getting vital knowledge on how this world works in order to move forward. The shallows are a great first level because it provides a safe haven to return to for a soft refresh in case there are any major setbacks. The shallows and the escape pod there will never go away. This is deliberately set up to give a false sense of security. Yes, the shallows are safe to explore for the most part, but in order to get anywhere in the game, we must leave the shallows. This makes it so that going anywhere outside of our comfort zone builds up this sense of dread, especially when we start visiting the neighboring biomes, such as the kelp forest or the Great Plateau. These biomes are used to restrict the player while also giving the player a sense of danger that is out there, introducing us to small threats like stalkers and sand sharks. Again, these biomes are there to tell us that once you leave the shallows, we are no longer safe. Eventually, the hesitation to leave the zone starts to wear down, and we gain more confidence in exploring the surrounding zones. This progress of slow whittling away at the player's hesitance to keep exploring is repeated over and over. Once we get used to exploring one biome, then we run into yet another. Even though technically, most biomes are able to be explored right away, one trip to the dunes or the far side of the Aurora will be enough to tell the player, yeah, I ain't ready for this. This means that it forces the player to create the appropriate vehicle for the biome and strategically place bases and safe spots to prepare for a mission. Okay, let's talk about the HUD. The 4 game modes in Subnautica utilize a simple yet effective HUD, with the status bars being shown to the side of the panel. The HUD for Subnautica in its final release are in the form of circles. The way the final status bars differ from the first set of status bars is the amount of space they take up. Having a large circle with smaller circles around it is a brilliant way to stack the bars rather than just having the bars on top of each other. The next part of the HUD is the inventory hotbar. In all honesty, this part is pretty standard compared to most other game hotbars. One positive I have is the fact that it gives the status of the battery life of devices. Lastly, there's the meter gauge. Now this little guy is actually one of the most important parts of the HUD. A lot of areas are a certain depth limit. This gauge can help tell the player where they are, where they need to be, and can inform the player what to do next based on how deep they are. You also have the option to pin blueprint ingredients to the HUD. This is a useful way to stay on track in getting a certain blueprint, and also making sure of what you have in your inventory without constantly opening it up. Given how gorgeous this game looks, the HUD color scheme manages to complement the visuals rather than taking the player out of it. So it's nothing groundbreaking, but it does all it needs to do very well and keeps the player informed at all times. The PDA is used for pretty much everything. It's the inventory, the lore hub, the mission hub, and the blueprint hub. The one complaint I have with the PDA is I do wish that the inventory was its own hotkey. It's just a small nitpick, but the PDA will open on whatever page you left it on, or if you scan something, it will also open to that scanned object file. It's not hard to simply pick inventory from the menu, but I do believe that a key for the inventory would be much faster in case you are already on a page. Speaking of inventory, Subnautica made one of the most mind-boggling choices. They made it so items do not stack. This means if you have 90 titanium, you would have to craft 3 wall lockers or 2 lockers. In nearly every other survival game where crafting is involved, these items would stack. But it gets worse. Some items take up even more space. For instance, some tools Riley carries would take up the space of 4 normal items or more. Eggs, scrap metal, seeds all take up 4 slots. This is an issue for several reasons. For one, it makes organization much more difficult. Since wall lockers can only hold 30 items, this means you can only store 7 larger items. The storage issues are relevant to the hotbar as well. All items in the hotbar are also considered inventory. Since the Sea Glide takes up a whopping 6 slots in Riley's inventory and is one of the most useful tools to have, Riley will be losing 6 slots he could have used for anything. If the hotbar is decked out with tools and the Sea Glide, then this means a whopping 10 item slots are filled. Why not make the hotbar and the inventory its own separate thing? Plenty of other games have done this before and after Subnautica. It doesn't even have to be 64 or 100. Just make it so items stack to 10, or hell, even 5 would be a better choice than nothing. This is made even worse when playing on survival mode, where Riley needs to have enough inventory for food and water. Honestly, the inventory, storage, and hotbar is one of the weakest parts of Subnautica. I hate having to constantly move items around just to make space for another item. The self-organization feature is nice, but again, if you're going to do that, then why not just have them stack? Another glaring issue I had with Subnautica was the scarcity of certain resources. I spent probably 5 hours just trying to find silver and gold for all the microchips and wiring kits I needed. I do wish that Subnautica would have had a resource respawn, maybe after every hour or so. I thought it was unnecessary to make players run all around the map just to find a couple pieces of silver. While I get it's a survival game and some resources are going to be rarer than others, I had the same issue even for titanium, lead, and copper. I think it would have been better to, instead of making outcroppings random, each one would be fixed so you know what you're getting every time. Granted, this isn't as big of an issue with me as the inventory is, but it still was annoying to deal with. Subnautica overall is gorgeous, with vibrant colors and creatures filling the ocean landscape. It also has some of the best water mechanics I've seen in a survival game. Surprisingly, Subnautica requires very minimal specs to run. I remember playing the game on my laptop, which was a 2011 Toshiba satellite. I was able to run the game at mid settings using only 6 GB of RAM and a low-ends graphics card. Seriously, pretty much any computer in the last 15 years should be able to play this game. Now unfortunately, I have to bring up some glaring flaws. While everything under the waves looks breathtaking most of the time, there are times when objects and sometimes whole biomes don't load in right away. A good example of this is the mushroom forest and the jelly shroom caves. In the case of the latter, it is not uncommon to see a crab snake performing its best version of a T-pose in midair. In the case of the former, the mushroom forest is one of the few biomes that I noticed frame drops. Sometimes a biome won't load until I'm already halfway through it. Other times, the invisible trees get the Cyclops stuck. I mentioned before how randomly the Cyclops will get stuck on objects. This problem and that could very well be the same issue. Regardless, it is annoying to have this issue since the game had 6 years to fix optimization. Also, this is still an issue they can fix. Patches and updates to optimize a game is very common, and the fact that the game still has this many graphical errors in 2025 is honestly disappointing. But it's made a lot of money, so why go back and fix things now? It gets even worse when going anywhere above water. Both the mountain island and the floating island have trouble loading in. It is clear that Subnautica team gave way more care to the underwater elements than anything above water. It's not even the fact that the graphics load in slowly. The textures and the assets are very lacking compared to the rest of the game. Even Minecraft distance rendering is more impressive than whatever this is. Now, while I do consider these pretty serious flaws that should and could have been fixed, to me personally, graphics are secondary to mechanics and story. I'd say about 80% of the game, the graphics are satisfactory. One way Subnautica differs to other survival games is how it handles combat. Technically, you can take the time to hunt down all the leviathans in the game, but the process is intentionally made hard and time-consuming to do. The Subnautica team wanted to make a game where the best option is to run away or avoid enemies. They wanted to make a game where the player had to find ways to avoid conflict rather than just killing everything. This is why the creatures in the game do not have health bars. The only real weapon Riley gets is a knife, and even though he can use the thermal blade and stasis rifle to kill creatures, there is no loot upon killing something, no XP, and no real reason. Well, there is that ghost leviathan from the Lost River. I can't stand that annoying piece of shit. There are only a few times I felt the need to kill the enemies. One of these times was the crab squid around the Deep Grand Reef Degassi base. It kept attacking my Cyclops and draining the batteries, so I went out of my way to take care of it properly, using a stasis gun and knife. The other time was the Lost River Ghost Leviathan, because I hate him. Other than that, I mostly avoided combat. It was too time consuming to engage in combat, and it was much easier to simply pass them. For the most part, I think the developers did a good job at discouraging the combat. One last thing I want to talk about is the story. While I love Subnautica and its story, one major complaint I have is with the precursor race. Why didn't they just put a signal out of some kind? You know, something that says turn back now, planet off limits, quarantined world, anything at all. This race was so powerful, so intelligent, and so resourceful, yet could not find a way to warn others. They downloaded their consciousness into computers, they built a giant space weapon, they ruled the Alpha Centauri universe, and yet they didn't even think about putting up a big sign telling other races to stay away. Also, don't tell me they didn't have time because they were dying. They had plenty of time to build a giant laser gun. Even if they didn't have time, they downloaded their brains into a cyber cloud hive mind. What has that hive mind been doing for the last 1,000 years? The fact that the precursors actually visited Earth before means they should have some kind of data on the human race. What about binary code? What about any code, even if humans can't understand it? What about a space station that emits a frequency? Literally any kind of warning at all would have been better than going for the nuclear option. The reason why this is a problem for the story is because the only reason the Aurora even went to 4546b was to look for Bart Torgal and Paul Torgal. If a ship goes to 4546b and gets shot down, then that means more ships are going to come looking for it, which means more chances for the Karar to get off the planet. Had the precursors put up some kind of a warning at all, the Aurora and the Degassi might have not been shot down. Also, the fact that the Altera PDA is able to decode and decipher some of the information about the precursors just tells me the humans' technology is far better. Honestly, the fact that the Aurora landed on the same crater as the space gun is also a bit stupid. Like I said, I do love this game and its lore, but the contrived way the story is set up could have been better, and I do feel that it's going to be harder to justify it in later games. Subnautica is a game I can play over and over again. I love everything about it, and while not a perfect game, it has inspired me in so many ways. Anyways, if you are new to the channel and would like to see content like this in the future, then consider liking and subscribing. For now, this has been Tender Chicken Guy, and I will see you guys later. Peace.